this is approximately the number of people. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, guys. I'm so excited. This is great. I really love this turnout to talk about trees today. I'm really excited. I'm Melanie Askey. I'm the climate specialist here at the Office of Energy and Climate Change, in case some of you don't know me. And thank you for joining today. Just a quick housekeeping item that we are recording this webinar. So if you don't want to be on that recording, just keep your video off and you can feel free to send questions in the chat instead. So with that, I'm going to start presenting, which Kathy and I practice, so it should be no problem. Okay, can you guys see it? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm here today as part of the Tree Canopy Working Group, and we're going to talk about some of the ways that we can look at tree canopy here in Dane County. As I said, I'm from the Office of Energy and Climate Change. We got involved in trees because trees are a natural climate solution. You probably know that we have a climate action plan. It's a really ambitious roadmap to reduce emissions in Dane County. The goal being to reduce emissions 50% by 2030 with a road to carbon neutrality by 2050. So our climate action plan has a series of recommendations, and the one that's most relevant right now is it cites the need to preserve and protect existing trees and reforest where possible. Trees are able to sequester carbon, and so they're a great natural carbon solution to some of the emissions that we're producing. So it makes sense that we want to preserve and protect the tree canopy that we do have. So the working group started back in September, I would say, 2021. So we're a fairly new group. So with that, like, we really welcome like your suggestions, your thoughts, etc., because this is really evolving quickly, and we can take this in many different directions depending on where there's interest and where there's potential for collaboration, etc. So trees, we started the working group because trees are not just a climate solution. Trees are like really widely awesome for so many different reasons. They're aesthetic value, like most people like having trees around, and there's really not that many solutions for so many issues that are also like very palatable to people. So people like having trees around, and also they do a lot of important things. And so our working group touches on sectors that all these trees influence. So aesthetic value, like people like having trees in their neighborhood. And economic value, there's property value implications for having trees around. Beyond that, there's like so many different public health benefits, from the air quality to like potentially reducing asthma rates, and also the mental health benefit of trees. People are calmed by trees, and they really provide a value to people's like overall emotional well-being. Trees are also important for the ecosystem. Like, the critters really need the trees, and so it's not just a people solution, it's for wildlife too. And so there's a lot of important ecosystem benefits to trees as well. Not to mention the climate aspect and the carbon sequestration potential that trees bring to the table. So with all of those benefits in mind, the Tree Canopy Working Group formed, and it's a really diverse coalition of members who are just broadly interested in improving tree canopy across Dane County. So we have members from Dane County, the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, City of Madison, UW-Madison, Urban Tree Alliance, UW Extension, and Public Health. That sort of just speaks to how many different types of industries, people, sectors, etc., care about trees, because they provide so many of these different types of solutions. So since meeting in September 2021, we've put together sort of a framework, strategic vision for what the working group wants to accomplish. So broadly, our working like mantra is that access to trees is a human right. Everyone deserves the cool shade, clean air, better runoff management, and the public health benefits that trees provide. So our aim is to collectively maintain, protect, and expand public and private tree canopy across Dane County where ecologically appropriate. And a particular focus is on ensuring equitable access to trees and their benefits for all residents. Probably just emphasize that last sentence one more time. Our primary goal here is to make sure that there's equitable access to trees and making sure that we're looking at the most vulnerable populations and areas for where we work first and foremost. I'll also emphasize the maintain and protect piece of this too, because when you think of like a working group around trees, you think about like nice tree planting projects. And this is a yes and sort of situation where, yes, of course, we need to plant more trees, but we also need to protect and maintain what we do have. That's just as, if not more important, because it's a lot cheaper to keep an existing tree that's 100 years old, and it's a lot more effective than it is to have to plant new trees. And so we want to understand how we can better protect and maintain the canopy that we do have so we don't continue to see declines. And the need in Dane County is really stark here. On the left, you can see canopy cover in a gradiated way, and on the right, just more or less than 30%. American Forest, which is a national nonprofit, recommends canopy cover of around 30%. That's sort of a hand wavy thing to say, and does it apply in all areas? Probably not. But it's sort of the metric that a lot of cities, municipalities are using in order to say, do we need to work here or not? And so it's sort of just like a baseline, quick and dirty, like, is this a problem right now? So you can see on the right that almost everywhere in Dane County, there's probably a need to plant more trees. And here I just want to say context really matters. Like, you're looking at urban and rural, historic forest cover really matters. So, so the context matters here. But overall, you can see that there is going to be a need to improve tree canopy kind of writ large across the county. So with that knowledge, the working group has been like really focused on what can we accomplish in the near term and in the long term. Maybe here I'll stop and say, like, we're doing the best that we can. We're a working group of people who doesn't have a staff member like dedicated to this and only this. So we're doing this in addition to our other jobs. So kind of our motto here is like, do what you can when you can. We can't take on the world right now, but we can look at the highest and best use of our time and say, let's work here first. And so we're doing the most we can with the staff that we do have, the staff time that we can find. So in 2022, these are kind of the things that have been coming up in some of our working group meetings. As I talked about before, we kind of outlined a broad strategy vision. So we have sort of a framework for how we want to operate and what our like long-term goals are. In terms of tree planting, we did one tree planting project already. This is really important because we don't want to just talk about the theory of planting trees and like how the process could work. We really actually need to get going and make progress now, even if everything isn't perfect and we don't have everything in place. We just want to get going right now. So we did one tree planting project in Cambridge. I think that was back in March, and we're looking to do more too later this fall. And I'll talk more about that later. Also interested in connecting communities to resources. We see ourselves as potentially being a hub of information. Like, a lot of communities across Dane County have varying degrees of capacity. Some have arborists on staff, some don't. So where can people go for information and help and connect to resources? Well, that could potentially be us. And so we're thinking through, like, what do people need and how can we provide that? And here, I guess I'll mention that we do have a web page up, and I'll show the link to it later, but just one way to start getting the word out about where we can connect people to resources. Next, outreach. We don't want to just do this in a vacuum. Like, we really need communities to listen to and hear from to see what their priorities are. Outreach is really like a central goal to make sure that we're not just making priorities without looking at what the diverse needs are in the county. The county is so nuanced in terms of what the different cities and towns need or want, that we need to have a better understanding about what these kind of micro micro ecosystems want or need to like better tailor solutions that meet the needs of like particular neighborhoods. And so I'm going to talk more about outreach later. With that, hand in hand comes mapping priorities. We really want to understand better where the priority areas are for the group to operate. I'm going to focus on that in a minute too. But then also tree maintenance. We also don't want to just talk about where you plant trees. We also want to talk about how you can maintain trees and how you can get funding and policies in place that will help you maintain trees more efficiently. And then last, funding. In order to do any of this work, communities are going to need funding. So how can we be a resource for people to make sure that they know about the funding opportunities that are available and connect them to resources and solutions that might work for their community? So that's sort of just a broad strokes overview of all the things, like the things that we're thinking about in 2022. But in this presentation right now, I want to focus on these two, the mapping piece and the outreach piece, for the purposes of today's presentation. So let's talk mapping first. The lucky thing about this group is that we have CARPC involved, and they have some awesome GIS capabilities that can help us look spatially at the county and see, okay, where is the need the greatest based on the factors that we're prioritizing. So our ultimate goal here is to build a weighted prioritization index that looks at like a multitude of factors and sort of really in a fine-grained way looks at where the need is the greatest for different communities across the county. So things like social vulnerability, where are residents more vulnerable? So the social vulnerability index is a Wisconsin index that like, I think this like Wisconsin Public Health maintains, and it's an index of physical health, socioeconomic factors, and then factors like access to like natural built environment factors, like do you have access to a park, stuff like that. So it sort of tells you spatially where vulnerable residents are across Dane County. So that's a really important aspect for us when we're talking about equity and where to prioritize our time. Other things that are really critical for us is where is tree canopy changing the most, or where has it historically been low? Because it can't be changing fast in areas where there weren't any trees to begin with. In addition, things like surface temperature are really important. That tells you about the heat island effect and how residents are so much more vulnerable to heat events when there isn't tree canopy cover to help provide shade. Likewise, impervious surface area, there's a lot of hardscapes across the county where you're talking about roofs, driveways, sidewalks, that kind of thing. Impervious surface just means more runoff, and trees help alleviate some of that, and it can be a tool in runoff management. And then also public ownership and multifamily housing, because it's not just about what is happening where, but you're also talking about where are people going to benefit the most per tree, and also where are the opportunities the greatest, because it's not equally, you're not equally able to plant in any area. So you might want to prioritize areas that have housing first, or public ownership that might be easier for some reason if you have government to collaborate with. So that's the ultimate goal. But in the near term, we're going to be focusing just on a rough and ready analysis for the purposes of this presentation. So ultimately, in the next year, we're going to be building that weighted prioritization index. We're working with a group called Thriving Earth, and it's a technical assistance grant in order to pair us with experts who can help us build that tool. But we don't want to just wait for a tool to be perfect and ready. We want to be iterative about how we're doing this. So right now, today, we're talking about just a rough and ready first pass at what the priorities are in the county based on two factors: social vulnerability and percentage canopy change, or areas that have had historically low canopy cover. As time goes on, we'll be incorporating more of those other factors, but for today, we're just going to focus on these two. And then I just want to switch back for a moment because I want to hit on the last point that as we do this process, we're going to continue to refine this with community data. And so that's one of the reasons that we're here today talking to you guys, because we want to make sure that we're connecting with communities and augmenting what we have with what communities have that might be finer grained than what we have. So we can incorporate other factors from specific communities if they have that data. So we'll continue to get better as we get more data. So like I said, we're going to talk about prioritization across the county with these two factors, social vulnerability and canopy change. So how does that look? How do we do that? Priority areas are areas at the intersection of social vulnerability and canopy change. How do we get those areas? It's a combination of LiDAR data and community data that we analyze to create those areas. LiDAR data is, what does it stand for? Light, infrared detection and ranging, I think. If you quizzed me, that may be wrong. But basically it's lasers that are flown over the county that detect changes on the earth. And so what you can get from that is where the trees are across the county, because the lasers will tell you where those trees are. And so the great thing about Dane County is that we have LiDAR data flown every 7 years. And so we have data from 2010 and 2017. 2017 is the latest data that we have, though we are expecting more to come in later this year and also potentially next year. So for the purposes of this analysis, we looked at LiDAR data from 2010 and we used that as our baseline data and looked at changes from 2010 to 2017. We used 2010 because that was a date that we were before a lot of the counties started to see a lot of the disease die off. So that was a good baseline year before we saw this like huge increase due to like disease die off. And then 2017 was the last year that we have available. So that's the newest data that we have. So we combined where are trees on the ground with the community data and use that to create these priority areas. Here, I just want to mention that the unit of measure really matters here because like the statistics and the analysis that I'll show, it really is really neighborhood, city, municipality dependent. If you look at the entirety of the county, that's very general. And if you look at a single block, like one block area, that's not like a meaningful unit of measure for most people across the county. So we had to try to like look at the tension between too fine grain versus the entire county. So what we did was looked at the unit of villages and towns. But if you wanted to look at a particular village or town, you can look at a much finer scale and say, okay, what's going on in this block or this area? But overall in the county, here's kind of what we find with villages and towns being kind of the unit of analysis here. We found that across the Dane County, we've lost about 12% of our canopy coverage from 2010 to 2017, with the highest decreases being up to 38%. That's really significant. So that's very meaningful to know. This loss is primarily due to disease, but lack of maintenance and ongoing development policies also likely play a role in what we're seeing here. And what kind of land is being changed the fastest? Land use across the county that tended to have the largest canopy decrease of canopy coverage were multifamily housing, single family or two family residential housing, as well as recreational spaces. And that's also really meaningful because it's where people are that canopy cover is getting lost at the highest rate. So how the land is changing is really important. And where the land is being converted versus just canopy cover decreases. Towns and villages with canopy decreases of 30% or higher include Village of Brooklyn, Town of Primrose, City of Monona, Village of Belleville, and City of Stoughton. So those are areas that we know we've seen at least 30% or higher, and that's a very significant loss. So that's why I'm calling that out. In contrast, towns and villages with the greatest total number of acres of canopy cover lost include the city of Madison, the town of Perry, town of Primrose, and town of Vermont. And so it's not just the percentage of decrease, it's the effect overall that also matters. So where are the areas across the county that you're seeing this intersection of social vulnerability and high percentage of canopy decrease? Here's the map. You can see the red areas here are the polygons that show that intersection. Calling it out on the left, Sun Prairie, Stoughton, Waunakee, Fitchburg. And here I'm going to use Fitchburg with an asterisk because it's really just like the area over here at the tip here. City of Madison and Oregon. So I don't have time to go through kind of all of these in detail, but let's just pick out a couple of examples and take a little bit of a deeper dive. So first, let's talk Sun Prairie. On the left, you can see the canopy cover decrease. If it's darker red, that means there's more decrease. Lighter means less decrease. And on the right, you can see areas of social vulnerability in the darker red here. When you do an analysis, and these are equally weighted, so we're putting equal weight on both of these, the polygons that come out as priorities to look at are here. So what we're looking at here is red is multifamily housing, blue is 2010 trees, orange is 2017 trees, and then green is like environmental corridor or green space. So you can see that these would be like areas to look at further for potential planting or interventions. But as I'm talking about, like, the context really matters. This is the paper exercise of like, here is where we'd be good to look, but what's going on the ground is just as important as what like a map reveals. So I don't know Sun Prairie that well. Is Scott on the call right now?
I am. Hi, Mel.
I was told that Stacy told you that you might get put on the spot here. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what's going on here, or any thoughts about this looks like residential. There's something else going on here, maybe some green space, some multifamily housing here. Do you have any insights about what's happening on the ground here?
Yeah, I think what I'll share is this data is incredibly helpful as we start to look at areas to identify and prioritize for our tree plantings. In that area specifically, the school district is a large parcel on the right of that bottom.
Oh, this
right
one.
area. Yep. So
Okay.
some of the density is hardscape for that particular area. And then we've also looked at the tree equity score from I believe the American Forests, and that area popped up for us as well. So I think that's high impact. For us, what's going on right now is we're actually doing a tree inventory on the ground, and that's giving us real-time live data, and they're actually working clockwise around the city, and that area is coming up next as they're doing the inventory. So what'll be really interesting for us is to pair that data of what you're seeing on the county level and what our interns are doing out in the field, literally as we speak, and seeing, are we having gaps? Is there certain neighborhoods that don't have tree coverage? And then we can look at budget sources, tree preservation ordinances, tree replacement funds, working collaboratively with the community to see where that funding can come from, so that we can, once we identify the need in that priority area, then we can look at funding sources to hopefully start getting them in the ground, and specifically in that region.
Okay, that is awesome. Thank you so much for that. It also hits on like many important points here. Like, first, like, this is just a mapping exercise. We really need to partner deeply with communities to know what's going on the ground, and also partner with the actual efforts that are already taking place. And then also like looking at like the long-term plans for what's already going to be happening, and making sure that we're dovetailing with like already things that are already in motion. So so that's just one example of like, okay, this is how it could look on paper, what's going on in real life. Thank you, Scott. Let's move over to Stoughton for a second. On On the left, you can see really dark area here. That means there's high canopy cover decreases. And then on the right, an area of social vulnerability here, and then also a dark area here. So how this might play out here is, here were the priority polygons that were showing up on the map here. So on the left here, you can see there's some green space going on. It doesn't look like there's any trees here back in 2010 or in 2017. So that could be either an area of historically low canopy cover or an area where it's not possible to plant. But on the right-hand side, you can see there have been trees and there are trees, and it looks more residential. So thinking about like what your priorities might be, are you trying to manage for runoff? And you might want to look at some of the hardscapes here. Are you looking to improve residents' well-being? You might want to look here. So it really depends on what people are wanting in order to see like what is happening on the ground and where can we have the biggest impact. In addition to looking at the intersection of both of those things, I just want to point out that you can look at just one of those factors if that's what you're trying to like prioritize. So an area, for example, of high social vulnerability that didn't have a high canopy decrease was the village of Marshall. Likewise, areas of high canopy decrease were like the village of Brooklyn, town of Primrose, and Belleville. Those didn't come out as areas that had high social vulnerability as much. Some, just not as much as other areas. And then on the right, there are areas that have had historically low canopy coverage. And so we want to make sure that we're not just looking at where the canopy cover decrease is the greatest, because you can't, like I said, you can't decrease what never existed. So I just want to point out with this slide that there are a suite of different factors that you could look at, and you don't have to look at just the intersection of both of them. Okay, so with that, I'll transition over to talking about outreach for a couple minutes. So the working group really wants to hear from communities. This is one of our big priorities for the summer and fall. So our plan is wanting to do listening sessions to hear from communities about what their priorities are. Do they like the amount of trees that there are? Are they thinking that there aren't enough? If they do want more trees, what is their reason for wanting more trees? What are they prioritizing for? In addition to doing those listening sessions, and that could take the form of like tabling at events, it could be talking at a town meeting, it could be coming to a school, it could be setting up a special event, it could take a lot of different forms. So we really want to think like broadly about what that could mean. But in addition to doing all that, we also want to be doing community surveys in a little bit more of a formal way, not in like an academic peer-reviewed journal way, but pairing this with actual surveys. And that's going to be part of our Thriving Earth technical assistance help that we get, is to put together community surveys to hear from them and potentially use that data as kind of a basis for justification for why do we need more funding for trees, or like how could that help a grant application, that kind of thing, or how can that help us formalize a refined strategy. So taking the listening session and community surveys and then making sure that we're iterating that into our vision, and making sure that our vision and vision framework is nuanced to be community specific, because everyone's going to have different goals and needs. And then using that and helping to do actual projects. And projects could be tree planting, they could be helping communities connect to resources, they could be helping them find funding opportunities, it could be helping them justify why increased costs, like you need increased funding for tree maintenance. It could be helping to provide templates for ordinance changes that would be beneficial for trees. There are like a host of different things that we could help provide as like sort of a hub of information. So that's what we want to do. And so that's sort of the request here, is that we would like to get involved in your community. So if you are interested in talking about doing a listening session in your community, let me know. My email address is right there, because we want to make sure that we're looking at not just the priority areas, but anyone kind of who wants to get involved here, but especially areas that are high need. So let me know if you want to be part of that. Second, if you want to do like a little bit more of an analysis of your community with that, with our maps, let me know. Like we can do that. It's not going to be perfect, but we're not going to let that perfect be the enemy of good enough here. So you let me know if you want to do sort of a community specific analysis of where you are, and we can talk offline too. And then the last thing I'll mention is tree planting. This is a really cool opportunity. So we got a donation of 500 trees. Nurseries sometimes don't want to keep their trees over winter, so they got donated to Land and Water Resources, who is, we have Adam from the working group who took the trees, and they're sitting over at Land and Water Resources right now. So we have like between 400 and 500 trees, and we want to plant them in priority areas. The goal would be to plant them by September or October of this year. And so if you want to talk to me about potentially planting some trees, let me know, because we are collaborating with the Sierra Club, who has volunteers potentially to help plant the trees. And then the great thing about the working group being involved is that we have Land and Water Resources involved too, which means that they might be able to help dig holes for us and use their equipment to help facilitate that, because hand digging the holes is sort of like the tricky part. But if a community wants to get involved, we would probably need help figuring out where to plant the trees, getting community buy-in or support on that, and then helping facilitate one or more planting events. So those are 3 different ways you can get involved, but don't stop there. Look at the website too. And if there's other ideas that you have in mind for how we should be talking, like let me know, because I said like we just started in fall of 2021, so there's more opportunities that we probably haven't even thought of to collaborate. So I guess with that, I'm going to stop presenting, and then maybe we'll go into questions if anyone has any. And I can also pop the maps on the screen too, if you guys want to see the like where the data came from. Hearing no questions, I'm going to share the screen to show you kind of, because this is really cool. This looks awesome, and Matt did a great job with this. Is Matt on the call? Yeah. Thanks, Matt. And actually, as long as we're doing this, I'll call out Lisa and Stacy and Jeff. They're all part of the Tree Canopy working group, and we've all been collaborating. So a huge thanks to everyone, because this is not me doing this. This is like a huge group of people who are working on this. So this is the really cool map that Matt built. You can see that you can toggle on and off the different layers if you want to see. This is sort of what it's showing right now is the priority score. So darker red is higher priority, and lighter blue is less of a priority. And that's the intersection of vulnerability and canopy decrease. But you can toggle on and off the layers and just look at areas of vulnerability, or you could just look at surface temperature if you're really wanting to prioritize the heat island effect. And look, like cities do have an impact on that. Like, what do you know? So it's awesome that it plays out how you'd think it would play out. And then impervious surface, I just want to call this out because it's like really cool data. The city of Madison has a really awesome data set for impervious surfaces. And so they did a really great job looking at impervious surfaces across, I don't know why it's not loading. There it is. Okay. So they did a really awesome job mapping that in a really fine-grained way. And then you can kind of see where canopy cover was in 2017 versus 2010. So you can see where it sort of changed. So that's what we're going to be working on refining over the next year, is that prioritization index. Any other questions or comments?
Hey Mel, this is Scott. I've got a question. I am really interested about ecosystem service valuation, the pricing, putting the value, the dollar value to all the benefits that you highlighted. Can you just speak to that a little bit? I think where Sun Prairie is interested in looking into this further is once we have a completed inventory, we can then start to layer on those values and tell the story to our stakeholders of how truly valuable these trees are and where we'd like to expand our resources and plant more. And I think having those educational plaques that list out the carbon sequestration, the soil retention, and even having a dollar amount that's estimated on each. I've seen it, it's a really cool example in some parks. But my question is just broadly, can you speak to kind of ESV and some of the resources that are available?
Okay, I love that you asked that because I probably should have mentioned that. So as part of the Thriving Earth technical assistance grant, there's like 3 components to it. One is the weighted prioritization index. The second big component is doing that valuation service piece. And it's not just ecosystem services though, it's actually like cost savings for like runoff management and stuff. So that's going to be more focused probably on the human-centered cost benefit of tree planting, but it includes those kinds of things like what is the benefit to soil, what is the benefit to runoff, what's the benefit to air quality, that kind of thing. So we should talk because we're in the process of starting that. The other thing that I'll mention is maybe we could talk more offline too, because there is a tool called Growing Shade that was from the Twin Cities. So it was built there and it's a collaboration with the Nature Conservancy. And they did a similar thing where they had values assigned and they like kind of line itemed out what a tree was worth. And so they've done that analysis for the Twin Cities. And so in terms of like their technical, like how did they do it? They might be a partner on if you're trying to do that as well. The third thing I'll say is that Dane County was one of, I think, like 3 or 4 cities that submitted an application for an NSF grant. And if we were to get that grant, there would be a component of carbon, like the carbon market value of tree canopy evaluation to help other cities get their urban trees to the carbon market. That's something that we may or may not do. That was an interest of the other cities. But if we were to get that grant, it would help facilitate like a process to understand how you value those trees and get them priced for the carbon market. And then the last thing I think is that there was a press release, and I'm going to try to email this to you later, that Gathering Waters is also has a huge partnership right now to do an ecosystem, like a carbon valuation of trees. And I don't know, I think they're looking at all of Wisconsin, but they may be a thought partner too, because I know that they're thinking about that topic. So yes, but I don't have like hard answers for you right now. It's more like there are a lot of people doing that, and that's sort of on our minds, especially from the cost benefit analysis side of things.
Mel, if I can just jump in there, all of those were awesome resources. It's also the case that the county's Land and Water Resources Department has established an ecosystem benefits team that is
yeah, the obvious one. Yeah. Yes.
Their focus right now is really on county parks and county initiatives like the Continuous Cover Program, but they're thinking through methodology to value really all of the ecosystem benefits, kind of to the point Mel was making. So one of the things that we're cognizant of, and I know Mark Redston is on the call, Clean Wisconsin did some analysis along these lines that inspired us. But when we do a solar field, we get reductions in phosphorus runoff because we're not fertilizing a field of soybeans or corn anymore there. And so there are like complicated ways all these pieces come together, and that group in Land and Water is starting to do those calculations on projects. And I think certainly trees are going to be part of what they look at going forward too. So listening to Mel's long list, I'm remembering that at the very beginning of our Sustainable Leaders Collaborative, we had a green infrastructure working group. Stacy will remember this because it's like pre-me. And I'm just struck that there's so much going on in this space around resilience and like ecosystem benefits. We maybe want to really, and I know our members have talked about interest in more discussions in that realm, hence this discussion, but probably others forthcoming. We should just think about how we have more of those conversations, maybe as a group.
Okay, question in the chat. Do you have more info about the 30% or greater decrease for Primrose? We would need to probably talk offline about that. So I'm like, let's set up a Zoom and we can look, we can look and zoom in there and talk about what's going on. Cause I don't have more information other than the Canopy acres lost. So I would have to like, we would have to do it together to see what's going on the ground. But we can definitely do that and we should do that. So let's talk.
Guys, I have just an observation, I guess, that it seems like tree planting and growing the tree canopy county-wide, as well as in communities, individual communities, has a great deal of potential to mobilize our local philanthropic sector, both in terms of cash contributions as well as in-kind contributions, whether it's trees, labor, whatever is needed, and having something like a 30% goal, or whatever the goal might be. It might be different on a community by community basis. That is kind of a basic ingredient to mounting a campaign that would involve a number of different stakeholders, countywide or in communities. And so I just think this, going forward in terms of the thought process for, and relating, Mel, to your comment about wanting to get going, not just sitting around and messing with data, which I understand is very important. That exciting donors to reach a goal, and understanding that I think there may be an element of civic pride in, say, just in a place like Madison where I live, to discover how far below that goal we are, and to feel like we can do much better than where we are at right now, and as well as all of the benefits of doing better. So currently in discussions with a couple of members of the working group, and I know we're going to be having, I think we're having a Zoom meeting next week with a subset of people. But that's one of the things I would like to try to introduce into the conversation and the planning going forward. Particularly, if we had what's typically a capital campaign usually involves a building that comes with a case for support. People, prospective donors, understanding how the money would be used, understanding that there's credible leadership that's going to use the money well, so that the chances of attaining our goal are pretty realistic, even if it's a stretch. Anyway, I'd like to get that conversation going at some track within the overall work of the work group. Work group seems to me like a great kind of umbrella to house something like that, or at least to be connected to it. So
I love that you're talking about this. This is like, and I would love nothing more than to go deeper into the development piece of this, because this is a really fundable idea. People want to support trees. It's a really sexy thing that almost everybody loves to look at. And so like, we just don't have the staff right now. So like, if you can help with that, and if anybody else has like capacity to help on that piece, it looks like Mark wants to chime in.
No, I just want to say thank you, by the way, for this presentation and for the group's work and the cities, the communities that are doing all this wonderful work. It's so important and eye-opening. And I'm just wondering, is there going to be, or are you thinking about kind of creating a list of not just like what Howard just talked about, like there's an opportunity to partner with the philanthropic community or with community associations to bring in resources for this effort. But is there other kind of thoughts that you have about, policy? I heard you talk about and mention them, but like, what are the things that you need help with to scale up this work more, to do it more quickly? It's not just a resource issue. I'm sure that's a huge part of it, but like, what are some of the other things that you could ask for from partner organizations like Clean Wisconsin?
Thank you for that awesome question. Okay, so here's a couple of things, and I'm going to make sure that other people get a chance to talk, because I'm sure other people have ideas too about what would help from the working group. So what I think would be really helpful is making sure that we expand our network out, because we don't necessarily have all the individual connections to the different towns across Dane County. So how can we connect with partner groups to make sure that what's happening on the ground is what people need? So facilitating some of that outreach that we need. And then we need, if we were like a hub, and then there were like different spokes across the county of people doing different projects and getting integrated into them. So like local leadership in a specific area that could help either get input from community members, facilitate tree planting events, or help look into like what else do they need, what the outreach reveals. Because I think that what you're talking about, like the policy piece, is really important. And here I'll highlight the tree board, who just created their own policy working group too. Their committee, I guess it's called. So they're going to be looking at policy things across the county that you could help like facilitate, I think. Maybe Lisa, do you want to jump in on that? Because I don't quite know how to like articulate it, but like the policy piece, I know you guys are taking a leadership role on.
Yes, so the Dane County Tree Board is a committee which has members appointed by the county executive. It's the same as like the Food Council and other Dane County committees. And we have just recently formed some work groups, one of which is outreach, another of which is the policy group, and then we have another one that deals with our annual events and projects. So we're just kind of reorganizing administratively. But one of the things that the policy group would be looking at would be things like tree protection policies and how we can work with communities to preserve trees that are currently there, how we can help make an impact on tree canopy and other things, but we're just in the formulating stages at this point. We're gathering examples of similar policies that other communities have enacted so that we can start the process of talking to administration about how we might make an impact.
So yeah, the policy piece I think is going to be a big one in helping facilitate like what communities need and how they can get it, and then advocating for maybe those changes in addition to the outreach piece. And then also,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Just one other quick thing, just connecting to like resources and funding, who should we be connecting to, who's really interested in this, who haven't we talked to about that? It could also be a piece. Go ahead, Lisa.
Sure. So one thing that I just did was reach out in my office to our natural resources educator and the people who do the strategic planning with communities, because I thought that might be, some people that might be looped in, but there are probably other organizations and entities that are on the county level or village, city, town level that we might want to integrate with that do that kind of work, because I agree that community engagement piece and figuring out how we connect with communities so that our work is accepted, and so that we find out what they need and want and all of that.
Well, and to, add on to that, we don't expect that these 500 trees are a one-time
Right.
thing. So we would like a process set up for, okay, we have these priority areas. Who do we go to? Where are the volunteers coming from? How do we set up an event? Like, how does that work in a streamlined way? And then it's equitable, like a plug and play sort of thing for different communities. Stacey, do you have any thoughts too? Or I don't want to, not to put you on the spot. But.
No, I know that, for City of Madison, we've looked at, our tree canopy in several different ways. We had an urban forestry task force that created a final report, and that report, did look a lot at more or less what the city can do on city-owned property. So I think this is an awesome way to start thinking and pivoting to the larger community and the overall tree canopy. I would also just put a plug in, as Kathy mentioned, green infrastructure. The City of Madison also received, through the Thriving Earth Exchange, the ability to dive into how we value green infrastructure, where we want to maybe shift a little bit and think a little bit more broadly beyond stormwater engineering, so that we can start putting that into place for some of the decisions we make and prioritizations we make as a city. So stay tuned on that front as well. I think it will align really well with Dane County's Thriving Earth Exchange on tree canopy. And I also highly recommend reaching out to Mel and Matt to do your own deep dive. I got to look at City of Madison and was able to dive into some parcels and say, oh yeah, that's blah, blah, blah. Or, oh, I understand why that's, green, not gray, or gray, not green. And so I think that it's really informative, because sometimes each parcel has a story, right? The data only goes so far. And I think it's important to have connections to the communities, to connect to the data, to tell the stories around these parcels, to understand, again, where those priorities might lie, or those opportunities based on the knowledge on the ground.
Mel, I'm just curious how much you're working with like communities outside of Dane County. I know, Kathy, you're really plugged in to the local government, and Stacey, you too, I think, into that. And I know places like Milwaukee are doing this outreach, where part of it actually were, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tree investments are being made by the philanthropic community. There's neighborhood associations and organizations that are part of the whole effort to do the outreach and identify the opportunities. It's all integrated with stormwater management. I'm just wondering, what kind of engagement you have on a regular basis with other places that are doing this in a much more robust way.
Not enough, but I'm glad you're here. We've been talking opportunistically to people who have done similar like mapping exercises, and like we've talked to Chicago, and we're going to call it the Twin Cities in a little bit. So we've talked to like 3 or 4, maybe 5 different places about like what they've been doing and stuff, but it hasn't been an ongoing like pipeline of exchange and knowledge. It's just been like cross communication, and then that's been it. So like, yeah, we would definitely appreciate help on, especially on how outreach works and what doesn't, and like how to facilitate in the best way. Yeah. Okay, these are awesome questions. Any final questions? Okay, I'm gonna type my email in the chat again so everyone has it. Scott, I will talk to you offline, and it sounds like Tom, I'll talk to you offline to follow up on like those specific, like more specific things. But other than that, you guys shoot me an email if anything else comes to mind. Mark, it sounds like maybe you and I should talk to you about what you guys are doing and how we can work together. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate this.
Thanks, Mel. Awesome presentation.
Okay, talk later, guys.